So I'm lucky that at least 3 people have spoken, so I won't have I'll have to go through the pain of explaining some of the terms that have been used already. So as you can see, my paper is on taxation and digitalization as well, and there's been a lot of conversation around taxation and digitalization recently, but if you notice, it's mainly focused on developed countries. The conversation in Africa is very sparse. And we all know it's a stylized fact that African countries have challenges raising taxes, and this is largely based on the current international tax framework, which makes, because of the way multinational enterprises are treated in the international tax framework, and also because African countries also because of the digitalization has exacerbated these challenges. And the 2 central issues which I'm dealing with in this research, the nexus and the profit allocation, have been exacerbated by digitalization. The nexus issue, the main issue with the nexus issue is the fixed base, the provision of the current Article 5 of the OECD and UN model, the fixed base concept that says that if a company, a multinational, doesn't have a fixed base in a country, then you cannot attribute profits to that, which means you cannot tax that corporate organization in that country. In terms of the profit allocation, we all know that currently the profit allocation rules are hinged on the current transfer pricing guidelines, which treats companies as though they are separate entities, whereas we know that's a fiction. In the real sense, these companies operate as single entities. So I'm addressing the nexus and profit allocation issue, particularly from the African perspective. And the study is on 6 countries: Nigeria, Senegal, Ghana, Uganda, Rwanda, and Kenya. I focused on 4 digitalized businesses. Google, and for Google particularly, I looked at Google ads, Google advertisements, and Uber, Amazon. So those 3 are foreign companies in relation to Africa, whereas Jumia was originally a Nigerian company, but it's debatable now whether Jumia is still an African company, because right now the parent company is Rocket Internet, and it's based in Germany. It also has investment from the likes of Goldman Sachs and the rest. So, in terms of significance of digitalization in Africa, the 2 main factors that has brought about the growth in digitalization is the influx and the growth in mobile telecommunications. Over there, as you can see, the leap between the year 2000 and 2017. Looking at Nigeria, mainly what is responsible for that is obviously the population. Nigeria is a country of about 200 million people as compared to the other countries. Also, the growth in the internet access, if you can see from the year 2000 and 2019 in terms of percentage, look at, something wrong with yeah, so you can see from the percentage increase, 33,600% increase for one country between 2000 and 2019. So this was responsible for the growth of digitalized businesses, and that's why you have the Ubers, the Googles, the Amazon today thriving in Africa. So there's no question of whether for African countries this issue of digitalization is significant or not. The OECD, as we all know, has been at the forefront working on taxation and digitalization. The Action 1 report did a lot of analysis on the challenges that we're facing from the advent of digitalization. However, the discussions were mainly on challenges alone, and there were no real solutions proffered. In fast forward 2018, the OECD came up with the interim report. Still, the interim report still did not come up with some solution, although some solutions were discussed, the lack of significant economic presence, using withholding taxes. However, there were still no lasting solutions. And because of this, we have, from the previous presentation, the EU proposals and some of these unilateral measures, because countries started realizing that So we can't, since the OECD is not giving us a direction, and we know that these companies are making, these multinationals are making money from our jurisdictions, it is important that we do something about it. So India, EU, France, Israel, a whole lot of countries started coming up with unilateral measures in form of significant economic presence in terms of nexus, and also equalization levy in terms of in form of turnover taxes to address the issue of profit allocation. And due to that, realizing that the OECD and the inclusive framework, even though initially they had planned to come out with something by the year 2020, because of this risk of international, the risk of coordination, not having coordination between these countries, they came up with a policy note. And this policy note was to be a prelude towards having what is called the program of work to develop a consensus. So the interesting part about the policy note is that there was this particular statement which Alex Covam tweeted, and it said going beyond the arm's length principle, and that was unprecedented. Nobody, I didn't see it coming from the OECD because all these years it's been sustained. They've been trying to sustain the current arm's length principle, and even even though they said that, you see that if you go through these two reports, you see that even though they've acknowledged that we're going forward, going beyond the arm's length principle, you still find provisions that say that, okay, but we will still sustain the current transfer pricing guidelines. So the program of work to develop a consensus, which is the latest from the OECD and the inclusive framework, well, no, I think I'm just going to skip that. So the main thing is there are two pillars under this program of work. One addressing the nexus and profit allocation, and the other one the global anti-base erosion. So these are some of the unilateral measures, notable unilateral measures, EU and India. So in terms of what the presence and the tax presence of these digitalized business in these countries, this is still work in progress, because when I was doing the interviews in these countries, I had challenges, because I mean I also work I worked in the revenue authority, and as government officials, sometimes you ask questions and they're not so forthcoming because they don't know the implication of the answer they're giving, even though you tell them that what you're doing is simply analysis. It's not going to be some media stuff you're doing, but they're still reluctant in answering. So I wasn't able to get some of the answers. However, you can see that Google is not, according to their website, there's no Google. They don't have any physical presence in these countries. However, they're making money from these countries, because if you're in all these countries, you can access Google ads. You can go on searches on Google. Uber is in four of the countries. It's not, as at February, they were not in Rwanda and Senegal. But Uber does have some form of physical presence, even though on their website they don't have an office per se, but they do have some presence, because there's an office that you can go to and register your car and whatnot. So that can be used. Because of time, I think I may have to skip. So these are, looking at the efforts made by these 6 countries, we can see that in terms of proposals, there are no new proposals. In terms of legislation, only Kenya has something, and recently the finance bill that they introduced has something, but it's only an amendment that says income chargeable to tax includes income according to a digital marketplace. In terms of whether it has any effect on the nexus and profit allocation rules, I'm not so sure. In terms of their plans, the Federal Inland Revenue Service, the conversation I had with them was, they came up with a significant economic proposal, but because they thought that at the end of the day it would require international consensus, they abandoned it. Ghana's looking into it, Senegal still unclear, Kenya waiting for the OECD, Uganda carrying out some studies, Rwanda very unclear. So So what I did was I looked at the options for African countries in two ways. What are the immediate options, and the long-term, what are the long-term options? So currently, the Article 53B of the UN model, which is a services PE, can actually be explored by African countries, because we know that digitalized businesses are dematerialized, and these digitalized businesses are characterized by services. In fact, they describe themselves as offering services. And also, the 183 days limitation for this article will, if you look at it logically, won't apply to most of these digitalized businesses in terms of Google, because you know Google all through the year operates in these countries. Amazon, Uber, they operate all through there. So this is a low-hanging fruit. This is a low-hanging fruit for African countries. And secondly, fractional apportionment, which can also be explored as an option in terms of the profit allocation as an alternative to the current transfer pricing guidelines. So what I'm saying at the end of the day is immediate options, African countries in terms of nexus, they can explore the Article 53B of the UN model, and then in terms of profit allocation, they can look at the Article 7, paragraph 4 of the same model in terms of in form of fractional apportionment. And going forward, of course, significant economic presence, unit to taxation with a formula apportionment. I put the user contribution here as a long-term consensus and not here because it's still very tricky, it's still debatable. It's not something that is very clear. It's going to be very difficult at this stage. So I think a lot of work needs to be put into the issue of user contribution. Thank you.